If we are to understand bourgeois cultural dominance today, we must consider the specific ideological field of art. More concretely, we must consider this field in relation to capital and its accumulation. The impression given by the art market, the commercial gallery, or the propagation of the mass media is that art has been entirely subsumed by capital. It appears as if it is wholly integrated into the economic structures of capitalist society. In reality, this relationship is still relatively uneasy, a contradiction which allows for considerable insight into the dominance of the mass media and subsequently of socio-ludic media. However, before turning to this question, we must ask a simpler one. What is art? The English Marxist Christopher Cowdwell provides a clear answer to this question in his essay collection, Studies in a Dying Culture. In an essay on the modernist writer D.H. Lawrence, Cowdwell argues that art is a relation between people, between artist and audience. This is contrary to its appearance under capitalist society. To the artist, any given artwork appears as either an object for the market or as an entity in itself, that is, art for art's sake. In the first instance, art is understood by its relation to commodities, themselves a fetishized form for human relations. In the latter, it is understood purely in relation to the artist's ego. To an audience, the artwork appears either as a commodity to be purchased or as an object, a book, a film, a video game. As Cowdwell says, the manner in which capitalist society functions denies social relations in the form of relations between people. Instead, they take the form of a relation between a person and a thing. Art adopts an illusory appearance. Once art is understood as a social relationship, it becomes far easier to grasp what it is. If a painter were to keep their work for themselves, it would not be art. It would exist simply as an ornament for its creator's enjoyment, deprived of its existence as a social product or a relation. If, however, the painter were to display the same painting in a gallery, it would come to exist as art. That is, it would come to exist as a relationship between artist and audience. Of course, that art is a social product does not mean that all social products are art. If that were so, then any number of objects may be considered art. Shoelaces, coats, chickens. The list is as long as there are commodities in the world. This is plainly not so in our present drudgery. If a certain product is to be considered art, then it must not only be a social product, it must be the social product of an artist. As such, in class society, what makes an artist cannot be the production of objects colloquially considered as art. It is economics.
My bed was first conceived and made in 1998, and it wasn't intentional, its first beginnings. I spent 4 days in the bed, and when I got out of bed, I looked at it and thought it was disgusting. And then I realised that this bed had probably saved my life and kept me safe. And then at that moment, just saw it in a white space, and I realised that it was art.
Money!
What strikes me about the fountain is that although it's a male object in the sense that it's used by men, it's not, of course, in the position it would normally be in a lavatory. And placed as it is, it's got a feminine form, a sort of hip-like shape. And I can't help seeing the elements of it, the plumbing elements, as female.
You know, I mean, this idea of like taking your own shit and canning it, you know, and making little labels for it. I mean, you can't really beat that. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, he gets to the sort of like the logical kind of conclusion of thoughts in terms of like production and kind of the way to kind of invert hierarchy.
Money! Whoa! Wait.
The best part of these guys.
Yeah.
So you can use them. Yeah. However you can.
Yeah. So how much, roughly a month, how much average work?
Maybe $60 to $70.
Yeah.
Obviously, whatever we give, they're happy with that. They don't know what exactly they are worth.
The factory owners, they do threaten the workers. They hire goons, the local goons of areas, and they tell them to beat them up, beat the workers up, anything that is going to lead them to keep their mouths shut about anything else.
In the German ideology, Marx and Engels write that the exclusive concentration of artistic talent in particular individuals and its suppression in the broad mass which is bound up with this is a consequence of division of labour. Whilst this division of labour may be understood in broad terms through the prism of Gramsci's approach to hegemony and traditional intellectuals, its existence in the arts has a specific character. Art is a relatively exceptional field in terms of economics. This applies particularly to the traditional arts, for example painting, sculpture, the writing of music, fiction and poetry. This exceptionalism is rooted in production. For the production of any object to form part of capital, that is, the relationship of exploitation between bourgeoisie and proletariat, the labour which produces it must form part of this relationship. Historically, this is accomplished in two phases, referred to by Marx as the formal and real subsumption of labour to capital. The first of these phases is accomplished when capital takes over an existing labour process. That is, when capitalist investment begins to derive profit from an existing process of production. This process renders human labour power a commodity. The real subsumption of labour to capital occurs after this, when the capitalist class begin to organise production, changing it by the application of industrial means of production, of science and of technology. Capital now authentically controls the productive process. Among the traditional arts, production is neither really nor formally subsumed to capital. Poets and painters do not generally receive an hourly wage, nor often employ workers in this manner. Rather, the traditional artist produces their work before any financial transaction takes place. Their production occurs outside of the capital relationship. It is only once a work is completed and sold on the art market to a publisher or a record label that such artworks come to form a part of capital. The artist is therefore neither bourgeois nor proletarian. They exist in a pre-capitalist economic relation as artisans. rather than diminishing the ideological dominance of the capitalist class over the arts, this strengthens it. It does so for two simple reasons. If one does not garner a wage from their labour, they must already be in possession of wealth. The sale of artworks on the market is the only manner in which their character as social products may be realised. That is, it is the only way in which they may be realised as art. The reproduction of artworks is entirely organised by capital, as is the art market, so the purchase of a work depends on its will. Of course, this is not true of all forms of art. This is very clear when considering those forms which capitalism has presided over since their birth, namely film, television, and video games. It is clear to see that capital operates in the production of these aesthetic forms. Capitalists invest in their production, hire workers, and pay them in wages, aside from a few exceptional roles. This does not, however, render the workers within them as artists. Rather, they operate as aesthetic technicians employed by capitalists to perform particular forms of skilled labour. Unlike the artist, their labour is not an expression of themselves. The artist in these scenarios becomes indistinguishable from the capitalist or corporation which presides over the work. The same is true of studio artists, such as Damien Hirst, who command creative control over the hired aesthetic technicians which make their work. This understanding of art provides a window into understanding its material development under the domination of capital. A simple observation demonstrates this clearly. The enormous growth of the mass media and the entertainment industry is intimately linked to the fact that it is possible to invest in the production of these forms. Capital plays a central role in their development and proliferation in a manner organic to its rule. This is essential to grasp if we are to begin to approach our present cultural moment, in which the artistic, aesthetic fields of the superstructure are ever more dominant, and the weapons of bourgeois domination over these fields ever sharper.
So I owe them everything, I really do. The CIA is something that we should all not only cherish, but be saying thank you every single day.
In which the artistic, aesthetic fields of the superstructure are ever more dominant, and the weapons of bourgeois domination